Hello and welcome to another episode of the Aristi Cybersecurity Podcast. I'm Harj Singh, CEO of Aristi. In the studio today we have our CTO Rob Jervis. Hi Rob.
Hi Harj.
And Alison Bayliss, Cybersecurity and Data Protection Expert. Hi Alison.
Hi Harj.
Thank you for joining us today. It's a very expensive podcast, this one. So today we're talking about cybersecurity myths. These are myths that we've come across over a number of years. I've got a list here of some of these myths, and we're just going to bust these myths, I guess. I'll just read them out, guys, and just tell me whether you think they're true, they're not true, and put some context around the myths.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
Let's dive in. So the first one, and this is an interesting one. I come across this a lot, and we cover this in our CSIRO and senior exec courses, which Alison, you run these courses, don't you?
Okay.
So the first one is cybersecurity is an IT issue. Alison, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we get this quite often. It's a theme that we see a lot, that a lot of organisations just automatically assume because it's cyber, it's got to be techie, it's going to be all about IT. But actually, cybersecurity is about protecting information, and information is a business asset. Therefore, it's up to the business to make sure that it manages the risks to that information.
Yeah.
So what we say is people that are on boards and director levels and senior people within an organisation, they don't need to be a cyber expert. They just need to be able to ask the right questions to their technical experts and to their other experts within the organisation. I always say you don't have to be an accountant to make a sound financial decision. So the same thing applies to cyber. You don't have to be a cybersecurity expert to be able to ask the right questions to feel assured or to be managing those risks.
It's about responsibility, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So the senior management or the senior exec or the board are ultimately responsible for those assets and responsible for the risks. So they own those risks. So they should be dictating, or maybe dictating is a strong word here, but they should be articulating what their requirements are for those assets, how much risk they are able to or wanting to manage. And IT kind of make that happen. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I think, like I say, it's not just obviously around technology. People automatically look at technology because of the word cyber, but actually there's a lot of things behind this, other controls, whether they be organisational controls or physical controls around protected information. I think it's too easy for, for people to actually get blindsided by the fact that it's the word cyber, but when it comes down to it, if you have an incident or you have a breach, it's going to impact on your business, and people are going to be looking at you as a senior member of staff to actually explain and understand how it happened.
So the business owns the data and the risks associated to that data. Is it worth just saying a little bit about the concept of data owners or information asset owners?
Yeah. So, what typically happens within the organisation is that the CEO or managing director would typically be responsible overall for information risk. But obviously they don't know what information's out there within the organisation. So they would normally delegate that responsibility to a senior lead who might be a senior risk owner or senior information risk owner in public sector organisations. And they effectively will look to heads of department and department leads to actually look at managing risks for the data that they own and the data that they're the custodian of in their area. And it's like any other kind of thing. If you look at it in terms of finance, for example, it's having that delegated responsibility, and it works for all aspects of risk, including information risk.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. Next one then. Cyber attacks are sophisticated. I can't do anything to stop them. Rob, it's a good one for you.
Yeah, okay. So, well, it's true, isn't it? I suppose cyber attacks are sophisticated.
They can be, can't they?
They can be very sophisticated. It can be a mixture though. They can they're on a scale. So there's sort of more straightforward attacks and scenarios, and then there's more complicated ones. And really the key thing to consider with some of this is like a set of layered controls, really. So we're not relying on any one control, we're building up a series of controls. So the sophistication of an attack has to be higher to bypass multiple controls. So if we think about our organisation, our data, our systems, and then we layer the controls around that, that mesh of controls helps to protect against more and more sophisticated types of attack.
So is it fair to say, and you see a lot of this, and with sort of you run the pen testing team, and you're out there seeing lots of IT environments.
Yes.
And you sort of, I guess you've got first-hand experience of the kind of vulnerabilities that you see, and you also get involved in some of the sort of post-incident scenarios. Is it fair to say that most attacks are exploiting or starting with simple vulnerabilities?
A lot of what we see, a lot of the scenarios that we run into, they fit into a sort of a few key categories. There's sort of, just to mention a few of those now. The sort of social engineering, playing on sort of users, whether that's sort of directly or indirectly. Patching of vulnerabilities, so installing those updates is a really key control. Perimeter security is a big one. Types of authentication that are being used, so things like MFA and that kind of thing. So that there's generally sort of 3 or 4 key routes that are used.
So attacks can be sophisticated. But the myth around I can't do anything to stop them isn't really true then, is it? Because if you put this defence in depth approach in place, there's a lot you can do.
There is a lot. Yeah. There is a lot that you can do, definitely. And just applying, focusing in on some key attack scenarios and ensuring that you've got a set of controls in each of those areas will make your organisation significantly more secure.
Thank you, Rob. So the next one, cyber attacks are targeted. I'm not at risk. Alison, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think a lot of organisations do sit there and they think, well, why would somebody actually, sort of try to attack me? But a lot of the attacks are just opportunistic. They're just actually, somebody trying to, sort of take their chance. And actually, they've only got to get lucky once. And if your organisation is the unfortunate one, and, we see a lot of incidents, even the ones that are reported to the Information Commissioner's Office, that are around things like people not applying patches in time. So actually, it goes back to that whole myth about it being a technical issue, because that's actually a process issue if people aren't applying patches in a timely manner. And like I say, they only need to get lucky once, and if your organisation's unlucky, it can mean the end of some organisations having an incident like this.
So targeted cyber attacks, I'll open it out to both of you really. So there are targeted cyber attacks, aren't there? So if you're I wasn't say high value target, but if you I don't know, you're part of the CNI, for example. We're in an interesting time with the way the world is. So there are targeted attacks.
There are definitely targeted cyber attacks. That is a genuine thing, a genuine risk. And there are organisations that are targeted for a mixture of different reasons. I think the key thing to remember is that isn't the only type of attack. There are a number of threat actors that are out there looking, for example, to make money. So to extort money from any organisation, they might just look for the most vulnerable organisation that they could find. So there's a number of different groups with a number of different sets of motivations. So just to think, I'm not important enough to be targeted. Probably isn't taking into account all of those. And
we see that a lot, don't we, Alison? So customers will say, I'm only I've got no valuable information here, or it's not true, is it?
No, it's not. And actually, if you think about it from the information security point of view, we're about protecting the confidentiality, the integrity and availability of information. And for a lot of our customers, availability is key because actually that's what keeps their businesses running. That's where, that's where they get their commercial profit from. So it is really important. And we always say again, when we're looking at information risk management, then actually if you're looking at things from a GDPR perspective to make sure you're compliant, apply the same controls to all of your business data.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Edison. Right, so the next one, we have annual penetration tests conducted, so we're fine. Rob.
Okay. So firstly, annual penetration testing, great. That's a good
start,
proactive control there. But to say just because I do annual penetration testing, I'm fine, is sort of hopeful. There's a couple of key things there. Okay, so firstly, penetration testing and conducting it annually is only one type of assessment that you can do, and B is only done once a year. Also, there's there's the whole, what do you do after that penetration test is completed? You know, are you looking at that report? Are you understanding it? Are you remediating off the back of it? And what are all the other controls that you've got in place as well? You know, I talked earlier about kind of a rounded view of a layer of controls. Your penetration test that you're conducting annually might have a very specific scope. It might be targeting one kind of system, one aspect of your organisation's technical kind of exposure. So,
and who's doing the penetration tests? What kind of test is it? And what are the qualifications or the level of experience of the testers? I haven't really said what kind of test we're talking about.
Definitely. So there could be any range of any of those. So you want to identify testers that have got the right credentials, that are certified, that are specialists in their field, that are vetted potentially, depending on the type of organisation that you are. You might want the appropriate security vetting for those individuals as well, and then really talk through that type of test, that scope. What are you looking to achieve? What worries you? What keeps you awake at night? And then understanding kind of what the system is, its status, all that sort of stuff. Is it live? So that right scope and type of test can be defined.
So the next one is linked, Rob. So we'll stay with you.
Sure.
I have antivirus software, so I'm safe.
Okay.
Is that true?
If that was the only thing you needed,
that's all I need.
Life would be simple, wouldn't it? So antivirus is a good control, okay, but it is an overrated control. It really is kind of one of a range of things. So there are certain things that antivirus will detect and will help you mitigate, but not everything, unfortunately. Key things, obviously, if you've got that there and deployed, great. You need to make sure that it's up to date and it's well patched and your definitions are up to date, and that also some of those more advanced modes are enabled. So we commonly find things like AMSI protection and things like that are disabled. They need to turn all that sort of stuff on. And then we need to be looking at alerting as well. And then the other thing to bear in mind is that with more sophisticated attacks and the sorts of attacks that our team are pulling off on a kind of week-to-week basis, we're bypassing antivirus.
Right.
So it isn't the be-all and end-all.
It's one layer,
It's one layer, but there's a bunch of other things you need to do to try and prevent an attacker from bypassing and evading antivirus. So, it's an important to have that evaluated, and we can look at those sorts of things.
Yeah. So there's one more, Rob, which is also linked to this. I'm going to stick with you.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll come to you, Alison, in a minute. I use MFA, so I'm safe.
Okay. So it really is the list of individual controls here that might fix all the problems.
So is that true?
So again, like antivirus, MFA is a really good control. We would definitely recommend that people are rolling out MFA to all their users. It provides a lot of advantages. Okay. Unfortunately, it isn't the silver bullet that's going to solve all your security problems. So yes, it is feasible for us to bypass MFA. We can, a good strong implementation of MFA has a lot of benefits, but we can, sort of attack the user that's using MFA. So, for example, it might be like brute forcing, popping up multiple MFA prompts to the point they get sick of them and hit accept. It might be the implementation of MFA, how that's been designed and implemented into the app. Maybe there's a problem there, or it might be how it's configured. The type of deployment, and then there's also other areas, like sometimes there'll be exclusions from MFA from certain locations, or there's backup codes, and so there's all these kinds of aspects to it that you don't think about at first that could potentially cause problems and need to be evaluated.
So assuming that you're safe just because you've got MFA isn't wise. We wouldn't recommend that, I suppose.
No.
What we're saying is that make sure it's implemented correctly.
Yes.
And it's a layer, It's one layer in your layered defence model, I suppose. That's
exactly that. Yeah, it's a good control, and it's a good control to have as part of a suite of controls. But don't believe in isolation; it's going to fix all the issues.
Right. Thank you, Rob. Cybersecurity is expensive, Alison. Let's come to you on that one.
Well, cybersecurity. If you think cybersecurity is expensive, try the cost of data breaches. They're a lot more expensive, and also it's very expensive to try and implement controls retrospectively after something's occurred. If you think about it, if your organisation doesn't have cybersecurity controls in place and you have an incident, then actually it's the cost that you're going to have to spend on implementing controls, redeploying staff, investigating it, potential fines as well from Information Commissioner's Office or from even other regulatory bodies, depending on what your organisation is. So what we say is actually cybersecurity is an investment and it's an essential. There's no, when we talk about cybersecurity incidents and breaches, we talk about when, not if. So organisations do have to make sure that they're prepared and that they have got cybersecurity controls in place. Because, like I say, it can be extremely costly, and it can, for some organisations, it can mean the end of their organisation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess companies don't consider, or not always consider, the cost of reputational damage, loss of customer confidence, and they all have, value, and it's sometimes not obvious to organisations that the impact can longer term be quite expensive, more expensive, as you say, than implementing some good security controls.
Absolutely, as well. And also what we do find is that sometimes in organisations, if somebody has made a mistake and they've inadvertently clicked on a link, then they feel personally responsible, and that can actually have a really damaging impact on people within your organisation as well. So there are various aspects to it.
Right. We use Apple devices, so we're safe. There's lots of we are safe ones, aren't there? We use Apple devices, so we're safe. And this is an interesting one, isn't it, Rob? I'm going to come to you on this one.
Okay.
So Apple is generally considered to be a safe bet. So what would you say to that? If someone's using an Apple device or Apple devices, and they feel they don't need any of the kind of traditional security controls because they've got Apple, and there's an associated myth to this one, which is that Apple devices don't suffer from viruses. So maybe you can say something about that. Is it safe just to have Apple and assume you're okay?
So I think assuming that because you've got any particular brand of product that it's not going to be affected by certain problems is unfortunately not the case. I think whatever the brand, it's important to apply the right security controls across the board. So all types of makes and models of devices and different software vendors can all have issues. So deploying the right approach for secure configuration, lockdown, MDM, that kind of thing, regular software updates, they're essential really to protect those devices.
And those devices are all used to access resources, aren't they? They could be in the cloud. So you're using your Apple device just like you're using your non-Apple device to authenticate into a system, which could give you access to, cloud services, for example.
Yeah, that's it.
If you're targeting authentication, it doesn't matter really what device you're using. We talked about MFA earlier.
Yeah.
The concepts, I guess, are similar. Is that?
Yeah, that's it. As far as an attacker's concerned, they will leverage whatever device and whatever technology they can get a foothold in.
Yeah.
So it really sort of doesn't matter. And assuming that because you've got a particular vendor, you're not going to have any issues. As I say, you still need to apply the right controls to those.
Next one then. Cybersecurity threats only come from external sources. Do you want to take that one as well, Rob?
Security threats only come from external sources. Okay. So I guess this comes from the sort of assumption that, there's going to be a hacker at the other side of the world or, in a bedroom somewhere, and they're going to be breaking into the organisation. And that, certainly that is a type of threat actor. Okay, that is an option. But I think people underestimate sort of the realities around sort of insider threats. So whether that's malicious employees acting kind of intentionally malicious, whether that's people accidentally doing things or whether that's people being social engineered into doing things by somebody outside the organisation. So you look at sort of example of that external threat actor, rather than sort of trying to hack into the outside of the infrastructure, maybe they'll, trick, socially engineer one of the users in that business to click on a link, access a file, open a document, whatever it is, and that might provide that foothold, that route into the environment through them performing that action. And then really what you're, the scenario you've got there essentially is that external threat actor is now an authenticated user inside the environment with a set of credentials or a session. So then they've got a completely different view of the environment at that point.
That's quite a common threat vector, isn't it? Now, a lot of attacks start with a phishing type of or a social engineering type of attack.
Yeah, and there is the potential there that somebody will either obtain credentials for your environment or for your systems, or they will obtain some sort of session in your environment, and they are on the inside. Then the attack surface is completely different for them.
Okay, thank you, Rob. So next one then, our business is ISO 27001 certified, so we are now secure, job done. So Alison, as an ISO 27001 lead auditor, I'm naturally going to turn to you on this one.
Yep, so obviously it's great to apply a framework like ISO 27001, and that helps you as an organisation to make sure that you've got controls in place, and it provides you with that framework for making sure that you're adopting secure practices. But you can't treat it as a checkbox, tick box exercise. You can't just say, "Oh, the annual auditor has taken place, and I've still got my certification. We've got a tick, we've got a certificate on the wall." You need to be actually applying those controls on a daily basis, managing risks, and actually acknowledging that information security and cyber security is a continuous effort. You need the threats changing on a regular basis, and organisations need to make sure that they're aware of what those threats are and they're responding to them. And that might mean changing your controls. That might mean adapting some of the things that you're doing. So it's actually about really making sure that you can use certification. It's a great way to, sort of great framework to have, but you need to make sure that you're actually continuously reviewing that and making sure that you're aware of any changes that might impact on your information security management system.
It's a journey, isn't it, cyber?
Absolutely.
It's not a one-off activity.
No, it's not. No, and actually you could probably compare it to getting an MOT test on your car. It doesn't mean that something's not going to go wrong with your car in the next 12 months. So it's important that you do all the right things, like topping up your oil and keeping your water bottle full. You've got to do exactly the same thing when it comes to cyber security and controls.
And it's a risk-based framework, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So and understanding what that means to you as a sort of risk owner is really important, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And also making sure that risk management isn't done in isolation as well, that actually it's done. And it goes back to what we said at the start about this is a business issue. So actually, in order for you to understand what risks you're prepared to accept, you need to understand what the impact of those on your organisation, what the impact of those risks will be on your organisation. Because at the end of the day, every organisation has only got a finite amount of resources, so you need to prioritise activity against the most significant risks.
I guess this is why the business needs to be involved. So we do see, don't we, where ISO 27001 certifications are handled by IT. Because that's where it's supposed to fit, but that's not where it's supposed to fit, is it? That's the perception of senior management. That's a technical standard. So
and actually, external auditors. So obviously, we act as internal auditors for an organisation. But if you have external auditors, like from British Standards or from other, sort of accredited bodies come in, if they don't have a conversation with a senior person in the organisation about cybersecurity, they're more than likely to actually say that's a major non-conformity and you're not complying.
Yeah. So the final one is I'll pay the ransom and all will be good again. So that's assuming a ransomware style of attack. The organisation's been subjected to ransomware. There's a demand for payment, and I guess the question is, should you pay? And if you do pay, is that a kind of a guaranteed everything's fine now? So Alison, do you want to start?
Yeah, so effectively what you're saying is that you've had some cyber criminals that have actually, sort of entered into your network. They've taken your data, they've encrypted it, and they're promising to unencrypt it and present it back to you if you pay them some money. So bearing in mind that you've just actually been the victim of a cyber attack, and, sort of criminals have stolen your data, would you really trust them? Would you really be giving them that money? And,
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you could be in a situation where you have no access to your data. You're losing a lot of money. Your operations have ceased. It could be, it could be something in the public sector. It could be a hospital, couldn't it? So, it's and people tend to, it's a situation where, people tend to panic. And something's gone wrong. You've got no access to data. The systems aren't working, and you think it's a quick fix. But what we're saying is it's not a guarantee, is it? It's not a guarantee that if you're going to get your data back, and also it's not a guarantee that you won't get attacked again.
Absolutely, and I think that there are sort of indications out there that organisations that are a victim of ransomware, if they don't take effective controls and take the right steps, then they could find themselves a victim again. The other thing with regards to the whole ransomware side of things as well is that actually you don't know how quickly somebody's going to be able to recover that data for you. If you've got, sort of a ransomware attack and you've paid the ransom, how do you know that it's not going to take, days, weeks, and your business still continues to be impacted? And effectively, you're just actually funding more crime, because what will happen is they'll just go out there and use the money that they've got from you to go out and to actually then, sort of attack more organisations.
Yeah. So what can organisations do? So Rob, you might want to come in here. So
I think one of the points, the sort of the latter point in that question, sort of, should we pay the ransom or not, and then moved on to, I think it was, are we all okay
Yes, that's right.
after we do?
Yeah.
I think that, there's probably a couple of key things there. So, firstly, who knows? You don't know in reality. You could still have a problem. You could still have, a threat actor, an attacker inside your environment at that point in time. You don't know how your data's been exposed, so you don't know whether they've still got it, whether there's still a risk of exposure there, any of that. It's all still going to be reportable as a data breach as well. So you've kind of got to assume at that point your environment is somewhere in the grey, and it also sort of brings on some questions around sort of business continuity. I think if you've in this position where it's like, I've got to pay it because I haven't got my data, then perhaps there's some consideration there around how can we be in a position so that we've got more options, and doing that proactively before there's a breach, so that we've got more. If there is a breach, we've got a number of options available to us, in terms of that sort of business continuity, recovery.
I guess the important part of that, Rob, is that you should have a tried and tested response process, because if you haven't got a process, then chances are you will panic and end up, paying maybe.
Definitely, you might end up paying, and whether you pay or you don't pay, you're going to be in a position where you're worried about the security of your systems, and having the right business continuity approach will help you respond to a system that could be compromised.
So a good process will reduce that initial panic, I guess. You can sort of, take a breath and just have a look at your backups. Can we recover our data? Is there any other things we can do? Can we seek external help? Because you can speak to NCSE or external sort of support services. But there's things you can do before you get to the point where you sort of start paying, I guess. And if it's personal data, Alison, so I guess paying a ransom isn't going to mitigate the penalty, is it?
No, it's not. You might find out that you're paying out twice, in fact. So I don't think, paying a ransom is going to be seen as an effective control. When an incident occurs, if you've got information commissioner looking at how it occurred, they'll be looking at what you did to mitigate it. And yes, they'll be looking at what you've done to contain the incident, but actually paying a ransomware isn't containing an incident. and organisations will still find that they'll be, you know, sort of in breach of data protection law because they failed to have those technical and organisational measures in place from the outset, and that's where the breach is, and that's where enforcement action, including monetary penalties, will come from. I think the other thing to go back to this as well was about, you know, you talked about people being in a panic, and actually we speak to organisations who actually haven't had that conversation with their board and haven't got that blanket, you know, sort of confirmed response which says, what would we do if we were affected by ransomware? Would we pay the ransomware? Would we pay the ransom or not?
Okay, so they haven't even got a process which says, what do we do if we are asked for a payment? Do we pay? What's the company line on paying or not paying? Okay, that's interesting.
Kind of haven't even entered
that's
that conversation that might be something they need to consider.
No, it comes back to that whole thing. So a lot of organisations will potentially have cybersecurity on their strategic risk register. They'll know that it's a risk, but actually the devil's in the detail. So actually it's about what they're doing to actually mitigate that risk and who's owning those actions, who's owning the controls and who's monitoring it, which goes back to what we said from the start. In order to monitor things and be assured and make sure that the organisation's safe, you don't need to be an expert, a technical expert.
Yeah. Just to finish off then, maybe, Rob, you can sort of talk us through just a few points around, you know, what organisations can do by way of prevention. So how do you stop malware spreading in your environment? So, you know, are there some simple things that an organisation can do, or?
Yeah, definitely. So we've kind of talked about a few of these already.
Yeah.
So things like the antivirus that we were talking about earlier. You need to sort of look at in that malware scenario, how might malware come into the organisation? So it might come in through the web, through email, through, you know, USB media, all these different sort of routes. Think about the controls that are implemented to stop that. So, you know, things like web filtering controls and gateway inspection of email, and reputation filtering, those are all really good controls there. Again, you know, antivirus on the endpoint, enabling those additional options I talked about earlier, and locking that configuration down. And then when you get into kind of the spread of antivirus, not spread of antivirus, but spread of malware, it's, you know, you need to look at how is that going to propagate across the network. Okay, it's going to be that infected system connecting to other systems. So things like firewalling at the host level on the device, network separation or segmentation, those are key controls there as well. And again, it's layering all those things so that you can either prevent or at least slow an issue down should you get one. And then working with a partner probably as well, you know, just to look at those objectively, to
make
play
sure they're
out scenarios
effective
with
so
you.
on.
And
Excellent.
present the sort of, you know, the alternative view.
So there's lots that can be done, and it's not necessarily expensive. So a lot of this is just good practice, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, it's about the key thing, I think, with a lot of these things is about being proactive rather than reactive. If you take a proactive approach to security, a lockdown, an assessment, and understanding where the risks are and how you might deal with them, it puts you in a significantly better position. If you're in a reactive state, you know, you're really going to have your work cut out should there be a problem.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Alison. That brings us to the end of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I think I certainly did, and I hope you did too. Thank you for listening, and see you on the next one.
Thank you for listening to our cybersecurity podcast. If you're keen to learn more, please visit our website www.aristi.co.uk. Cybersecurity made simple.